Hey guys, welcome back to I think what is our fourth set of notes here for chapter 24 invertebrates. Today we're going to try to talk rather about two groups of animals. We're going to go through segmented worms, and I think we can do mollusks as well in a reasonably short time. So let's see if we can knock a few of these out. The first thing is segmented worms. We did flatworms last time. Now we're going to look at what are called annelids, and annelids are worms that are cut into little segments. A lot of times these segments are going to continue not just externally, but they'll actually continue through the body, and you'll see that in your standard earthworm that you get for like fishing, for bait worms, that kind of stuff. When it comes to segmented worms, these guys are bilaterally symmetrical, just like you and I, and they have that segregation inside and outside the body. They're bilaterally symmetrical, both for inside and outside. They have a closed circulatory system. So last time we talked about the whole idea of an open circulatory system where basically the blood was just dumped over the organs, collected at the bottom, and pushed back up to the top. These guys are going to have simple hearts. They're going to have vessels. The vessels will taper down to capillaries. Capillaries will go back to veins. Veins will go back to the hearts. Kind of that sort of deal where it stays in a vessel the whole time, and just like ours does. There's two groups, polychides and oligochides. Poly is many, and oligo is few, and the chides refers to these bristles, these tough little bristles on the outside of their body. So poly is where they're covered in these little bristles, and oligo is where there's a few little bristles, and you'll see those on earthworms as well. So these bristles are reinforced with chitin, which is something we've seen before. It's the same. It's actually like a complex carbohydrate, which is kind of weird, but it's the same. So I can't say protein. It's the same carb that is used to make the crunchy exoskeleton of bugs and lobsters and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of cool. And our sandworm is our best known polychide. So when it comes to segmented worms, here you can see this example of those rings I was telling you about. This is a very shiny leech, and you can see that he's got all these segments in him. Leeches are our first example of segmented worms. These guys can live in the ocean, and they can live in fresh water, and they can live in land habitats as long as they're really, really wet habitats. But we're really going to see them most often in fresh water. I don't know if you guys have read this as a kid, but when I was a kid, it was pretty common to go swimming and to have a little leech stuck on you as just part of it. Their body has a sucker at both ends. Generally, there's going to be one on the front, and there's going to be one on the back. And I don't know, the only ones that have ever stuck to me have only stuck to me with one end, so I guess I've just been lucky. But some are scavengers, and they'll just eat organic debris in the lake or pond. Some are predators of really, really small invertebrates, like our protists, and a few of them are parasites that will suck blood from vertebrates. And I think their target is probably fish, but if you're swimming, in the lake, you will work as well. And they have this really cool protein in their saliva that keeps the blood from clotting, so they can get a steady flow of blood. And having anticoagulants in medicine is very important as well. So leeches and the chemicals that they create and use are certainly significant to people. So the next one for an oligochite, which has just a few of those bristles on the outside of its body, is the earthworm, and this is the one that you're going to be most familiar with. Its body's coated with a bunch of proteins that are secreted on the outside of the body, and that makes them feel kind of slimy to the touch almost. And there's a reason that they're kept moist like that, and that is because one, it's going to lubricate their bodies as they move through the soil, but two, it also helps facilitate gas exchange. Because worms do not have internal lungs, they breathe through their skin, and there's vessels all over basically where their skin is, as opposed to lungs. It'll just diffuse right across into their blood vessels, and then they have a heart and actually a few smaller hearts as well. And so they're just going to diffuse gases right across the body surface. They have a closed circulatory system with hearts and vessels. Uh, Pretty much a scavenger, organic debris, dirt, that's the stuff they're going to be eating. They have longitudinal muscles that run the length of their body, and if they contract those, they can make their body shorter. And they have circular muscles that run around their body, and if they contract those, they can become very long and skinny. So earthworms have the ability to become very long and skinny, or very short and fat, and that's how they're going to be able to move around. Earthworms are naturally hermaphroditic, but they cannot self-fertilize. So they need to be fertilized by another worm. So when it is wet and rainy, two worms will come out of their holes, lay on top of each other, and basically swap sperm. And sperm from one worm will swim down the clitellum of the other worm, and vice versa. And that's how they're going to cross-fertilize to keep that genetic diversity uh, for sexual reproduction, even though they're hermaphroditic. So here's kind of what a worm looks like. And I ripped this off of Google, so the picture is not really great, but mouth at the front, anus at the back, not that complicated there. All these rings and segments can be counted and numbered, starting with 1 at the mouth and continuing all the way back. This big band-aid looking thing is called the clitellum. Inside of the worm, they do have a ganglia. You can call it a brain or ganglia, but it's a bunch of nerves, and those nerves run down the body to coordinate movements. Their mouth opens up into a pharynx, then past the hearts to a crop and a gizzard. And so it's really not unlike a bird. They have a tough muscular portion of their digestive system to grind up dirt and organic material. And then it goes into the intestine, and the intestine continues all the way down. Here you have these hearts, which are called aortic arches, and really they have one big heart that runs down the middle, and then these smaller aortic arches that are going to run across, 5 of those. And so you'll sometimes hear people say that worms have 6 hearts, things of that nature. But really they're all working together. And then there's just one big vessel that runs down the back, one big vessel that runs down the belly. There are little nephridia, which are basically tiny worm kidneys that filter the blood and excrete the waste through the skin. There's the coelom, which is the body cavity we've talked about in invertebrates already. We said some were acoelomates, having no true body cavity. The earthworm has a true body cavity, and that's the coelom that developed, a lot of this stuff developed from the mesoderm when it was just a little embryo. So there's the circular muscles I told you about here. These pink lines are showing that the same septum that gives you the ring on the worm actually continues internally all the way down to the intestine, which is really cool. A lot of the reproductive structures are right up here by the hearts, seminal vesicles going to a sperm duct, and also ovaries with a seminal receptacle, so they can get semen out, they can bring semen in, and that's how they're a true functioning hermaphrodite. And then there's these little tiny bristles on each segment of the worm that are going to help it to move through the dirt, and those are called setae. And that's pretty much what you need to know about an earthworm. So now we're going to look at mollusks. Mollusks are animals with a mantle, and a mantle is kind of a tough thing to describe. Your book described it as a mantle is something that contains a mantle cavity, but that's okay. You know, it's like saying a mouth is something that contains an oral cavity. It's like, well, all right, I guess. A mantle is basically their big, soft, squishy body. And some of them have a shell, and some of them don't have a shell, but their big, squishy bodies called the mantle. And so when we look at mollusks, these are, again, we're going to continue on with the bilaterally symmetrical animals. And they have a mantle. All of our mollusks do. And the mantle is a skirt-like extension, there you go, of their upper body. And like I said, it encloses the mantle cavity, which I'll show you in some pictures here. And the vast majority of mollusks are marine, but we do get a few that live in fresh water and a few that even live on land, but they have to be in pretty moist environments on the land. When it comes to respiratory systems, not a surprise here. If they're aquatic, they have gills. That includes snails, and if they live on land, they have lungs, and that includes snails. So some snails have lungs, and some snails have gills, and some snails have gills, but if their environment is wet enough, they can live on land, and it is very confusing to my little brain. So here we go. For mollusks, there are 100,000 living species that we know of. So whatever they're doing, they're obviously very successful. We break them down into 4 main classes. The chitons, which I have never seen, but apparently look like this. There's a dorsal shell with 8 plates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, that checks out. So I don't know how to describe this. I really don't. I don't know. I don't know what that thing is, but there's a little soft body inside of it, and it crawls around the ocean, and it's kind of awesome. Then there's the gastropods, which does make more sense. Pod means foot, or pod means foot, and gastro means gut. And so a gastropod means an animal whose foot comes out of its gut. And so I'm cool with that. It's the belly-footed animal, and this long thing that snails slide on is called their foot. And it comes out of their belly. So I'm cool with this. And those are snails and slugs. Snails have the shell, like this fellow here. Slugs don't. There's bivalves. Bivalves, a valve is one side of a shell. So a bivalve has one, two sides of a shell that open up at a hinge, and inside of that delicious little thing we call an oyster, there are big muscles to close the shell. There's a pretty simple digestive system, there's reproductive organs, and there's gills all in there, which is pretty awesome. So mussels, oysters, clams, scallops, anything with two sides to a shell is a bivalve. And then cephalopod. Cephalo means head, pod means foot. So this name means the animal with the foot that comes out of its head. And for squids, octopi, octopuses, and cuttlefish, their foot has diversified into tentacles, and those tentacles come out of their head. And so the tentacle heads are called cephalopods, so that name kind of makes sense as well. And we'll talk about, I think we might have some options to dissect a few of these if you guys would like to. I think we should talk about that in class. All right, so now we're going to look at a lot smaller bilaterally symmetrical animals, and these are called rotifers and tardigrades. And they kind of get a class of their own because this guy's like microscopic, and so is this guy. And I think they get a lot of attention because of how tough they are. Let's get into it here. Rotifers is this little guy right here, and they live in fresh water and a land habitat that's really, really, really wet to support them. They're really small, less than a millimeter long, so it's going to be kind of hard to see them. The weird thing about them is right here on their head, there's a whole bunch of cilia, and those cilia are going to move food into their mouth. Why they belong with our invertebrate animals as opposed to with protists, I'm not entirely sure. And I should look that up because when you look at them and they're that small, you kind of think they remind you of Protista. At least I do. So let me check on that because he really just looks like he belongs to Protista, but there must be some sort of reason why he gets to be an animal. Then there's tardigrades. Tardigrade is most commonly known as a water bear. This is an actual picture of one, and they really do look like this. They're probably definitely the toughest animal that has ever lived or will ever live. They are insane. Water bears can survive temperatures that are way, way, way below freezing and insanely hot temperatures. And they will form a really tough, basically, cyst and hatch out of it and grow when the conditions improve. But they're insanely tough. They're going to eat plants or algae. They have this weird little circular mouth. They'll kind of suck, organic material out of those plants. They can survive dry periods. They can survive boiling. They can survive, freezing. They can survive anything by just becoming dormant. And they can live for years and years in a dormant state. So that's pretty cool. So tardigrades are water bears. Who would have thought? There's such a thing. Amazing little animal. But there you have it. That's a tardigrade. Okay, so we're going to stop there because these worms are going to be a little bit different. And I told you we'd keep these videos a little bit shorter. So we're going to stop with rotifers and tardigrades. So thanks for your time.